Welcome to Growing Devotions for Your Daily Life. This devotion goes out all over the world. The first part of this, for some of you in other countries, will not be impacted until the end. But for those in America, we sing a song behind every ball game or little league game or football game, and it's the national anthem. A lot of people know a little bit about the backstory of this, but do you know the whole story? It started in 1814 when the British were trying to gain control of America. Not just taxation without representation, but also the shipping lanes into Baltimore, the Chesapeake Bay, trying to control the cargo that comes in and out because of the amount of money that could be made. In 1814, the Brits had pounded Washington. The White House was on fire. The Capitol building was set ablaze. And they were making their way to Baltimore to Fort McHenry. The ships are already ready to bomb Fort McHenry. On the way out of Washington, there was a doctor. His name was Daniel Bean. Now, Daniel Bean was very prominent in this neighborhood, and he was well known and well liked, but he was captured. And the Brits took him with him because they knew who he was. Well, you say, well, how did Francis Scott Key get in all of this? Well, it's very interesting. It all happened because of the capture of this doctor. The neighborhood had a meeting, and they elected Francis Scott Key and another man to go try to work a deal with the Brits to get their doctor back. So Francis Scott Key and one of the townspeople made their way to Baltimore. Well, by this time, Dr. Bean had been kept on the flagship, the Tonnant. And he got in his small boat and he made his way across the bay, and he was allowed entry onto the ship. And what he did was something very wise. He went to all the British soldiers that had been captured, and he got letters from them. And they were talking about how well the Patriots had taken care of them and treated them and fed them and took care of their wounds. And he had all this documentation. And so when he met with the admiral, he said, look, I want to do a prisoner exchange for your British soldiers for these Patriots. Now, the Patriots were located in the hull of the ship. They were in chains and shackles. And so they began to talk, and he said, specifically, I would like Mr. Bean. And so while they negotiated who they were going to exchange, he overheard some terrible news. He overheard that they were getting ready to bomb Fort McHenry. And he looked and he saw the rampart and he saw the flag and he saw the people walking around, and he said, wait a minute, did you say you're going to bomb Fort McHenry? He said, yes. And now because you've heard that, you're staying on this boat. He said, but however, we have already sent a warning to them. He said, but there's women and children. There's not just soldiers. He said, we've already warned them. Unless you take down that flag, we will bomb. Francis Scott Key was filled with terror because he knew how many people lived there and how many people would die. And he looked and he said it looked like hundreds of ships were about 5 or 6 miles away, making their way towards the Chesapeake Bay. And the admiral said, as soon as these ships get here, we're going to unleash hell's fury on them. But we've warned them. The flag's got to come down. On September 13th, 1814, that's exactly what happened. For hours, the guns trained on this fort, and Francis watched. Francis said it was so loud that men could not talk to one another. You could not hear anything. There were so many cannons going off. And the flag still stood. He constantly watched. It was nighttime, and he said that as the flares went by and the fire was burning, he said he could still see the flag standing. He heard some hollering from the hull of the ship, and it was the Patriots. Francis, is the flag still there? He said, keep praying, boys. The flag's still there. Keep praying. And he said the men were on their hands and knees praying that the flag would stay there. He said he had no idea, how is this flag staying up? Every ship was trained on that flag to tear it down. He said you could see the pole was broken. You could see the flag was tethered, but it still stood. The next morning, the bombing stopped, and he was like, I have to go see. I have to go into this fort to see. How did this flag stand up? He gets on the small boat, and he rows back to the fort. He goes in, and he said he noticed how crazy the pole was standing. He was like, why does it look like this? As he made his way into the fort, he realized the ground was not holding up the flagpole. What had happened was the Patriots in that fort realized that it was going to fall. And if that flag fell, the war would be over and they would win the victory. The Brits would. So they stood under it and held up this pole. Well, because so many bombs were coming in to this flag, it was killing these men and women who were holding this flag up, holding this pole up. But what happened was so many people had died underneath that flag that the pole was leaning and being held up, not by the ground, but by the dead bodies. You know, these patriots gave their life for this flag, for this country. And that's what Memorial Day is about. It reminds me of a verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 15. That Jesus did not die for a country. He died for the entire world. And then it says, why did he die for the entire world? That we may no longer live for ourselves, but live for something greater. That's why he died for us. These patriots, they died under the flag so that you and I may have the freedoms. And many men and women throughout the ages have died underneath this flag so that you and I can experience the freedoms. Jesus Christ died for the world that we may experience life, not just life, but life more abundant. I pray you have a good weekend.